My name is Deborah Martinez. I'm 26 years old. I live in a cramped, drafty studio apartment in the outskirts of Chicago, and I work two jobs. One as a junior paralegal and the other pulling double shifts at a local diner, just to keep my head above water. My parents, on the other hand, are the saints of Sterling Heights. They are the kind of people who have their names etched into the brass plaques of hospital wings and local community centers. To the world, Elena and Ricardo Martinez are the pinnacle of selfless altruism. To me, they are the architects of a betrayal so deep it feels like they've reached into my chest and physically hollowed me out. The air in the grand ballroom of the Sterling Heights Plaza was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the underlying metallic tang of hypocrisy. It was the annual Citizen of the Year gala. I was standing in the back, near the service kitchen doors, my feet throbbing in cheap heels I'd bought at a thrift store. I wasn't there as an invited guest, not really. I was there because my mother had suggested it would be a good look for the family if I was present to witness their crowning moment. She didn't offer to pay for my dress. She didn't offer a ride. She just sent a calendar invite with the subject line, "Don't embarrass us." The master of ceremonies, a local news anchor with a voice like polished mahogany, stepped to the microphone. "And now," he boomed, "for the moment we've all been waiting for. This year's recipients of the Pillar of Justice Award for their unprecedented $5 million donation to the New Horizons Youth Wing. Ricardo and Elena Martinez." The room erupted. People stood up, their hands clapping in a thunderous, rhythmic roar that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. I watched my parents stand. My mother, Elena, was wearing a gown that probably cost more than my annual rent, a shimmering emerald silk that clung to her perfectly preserved figure. My father adjusted his tuxedo jacket, his face glowing with a practiced, humble smile. They walked toward the stage, hand in hand, the image of grace. As they reached the podium, my father leaned into the mic. "We don't do this for the recognition," he said, his voice cracking with a fake emotional tremor. "We do it because we believe that the wealth we've been blessed with belongs to the community. We believe in building a future for children who have nothing." I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my stomach. I thought about the past due notice sitting on my kitchen counter for my student loans. I thought about the $45.12 currently sitting in my checking account. I thought about the trust fund my grandfather, Abuelo Tomas, had left for me. He was a man of the earth, a carpenter who had invested every penny he made into land and stocks, telling me since I was 5 years old, "Deborah, this is for your freedom. This is so you never have to beg a man or a boss for your dignity." The trust was supposed to vest when I turned 25. A year ago, when I had asked my father about it, he had patted my hand with a patronizing sigh. "The market is volatile, Mija. We've moved it into a more secure, long-term management structure to protect you from yourself. You're young, you don't understand capital gains." But standing there, watching them hold that golden gavel trophy, something clicked. It was the way my mother looked at the donors in the front row, a look of predatory triumph. It wasn't about the kids at New Horizons. It was about the social currency. I felt a vibration in my clutch. It was a notification from my banking app. "Alert, your account ending in 4092 is overdrawn by $12. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had just deposited my paycheck. There was no way. I slipped into the hallway, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and opened my laptop, the one piece of technology I'd kept from college. I logged into the secondary portal my grandfather had set up decades ago, a mirror account he told me never to show my parents. It was a read-only legacy view that bypassed the management structure my father claimed to have created. The screen flickered to life. My eyes blurred as I looked at the transaction history. Transfer $500,000 to Sterling Heights Community Fund. Authorized by Ricardo Martinez, conservator. Transfer $1,200,000 to New Horizons Youth Wing. Authorized by Ricardo Martinez, conservator. Transfer $250,000 to the Elena Martinez Foundation. Authorized by Ricardo Martinez, conservator. The balance, which should have been nearly $7 million with interest, was sitting at $314.12. They hadn't just managed it. They had liquidated it. They were buying their saint status with my inheritance. They were giving back to the community, using the money my grandfather had spent 50 years of back-breaking labor to save for me. My dignity, my house, my future, all of it had been melted down to make that golden gavel they were currently holding on stage. I leaned against the cold marble wall of the hallway, the sound of the applause from the ballroom muffled but still piercing. My chest felt tight, like it was being crushed by an invisible vice. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking so violently I almost dropped the laptop. The smell of the expensive catering, braised short ribs and truffle oil, wafted through the doors, making me feel physically ill. I hadn't eaten since a piece of toast at 6 a.m. I wasn't just poor. I was a prop. I was the struggling daughter they could point to as proof that they didn't believe in spoiling their children, while they simultaneously stole the very foundation my grandfather had built for me. The sheer, cold-blooded, calculated nature of it was what hurt the most. They had looked me in the eye every Sunday at dinner, watched me worry about my car's transmission, watched me lose weight because I was skipping meals, and they had smiled, knowing my millions were paying for their next standing ovation. To understand how we got here, you have to understand the Martinez household. Growing up in Sterling Heights, I lived in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. My mother, Elena, was obsessed with the optics. Everything had to be pristine. If I left a book on the coffee table, it wasn't just a mess. It was a disrespect to the sanctuary we've built. I remember being 10 years old, sitting in the back of my father's black Mercedes. We were driving to a soup kitchen where my parents were volunteering. My mother was decked out in a modest but clearly designer cardigan, her hair a perfect helmet of mahogany waves. "Now, Deborah," she said, turning around to look at me, her eyes hard and cold like marbles. "When the photographers come, I want you to stand next to the little boy in the blue jacket. Don't look at the camera. Look at him. Look like you're listening to his story. It shows empathy." "But, Mom, I don't know his name," I whispered. "It doesn't matter what his name is," she snapped, her voice like a whip. "What matters is that the Herald sees a Martinez child engaging with the less fortunate. It's about the legacy." That was the first time I realized that people weren't people to my parents, they were accessories. And I was the most important accessory of all. I was the proof of their groundedness. While they were donating 5-figure checks to private schools, I was told that if I wanted a new pair of sneakers for track season, I had to earn the money by doing extra chores for the neighbors. "Hard work builds character, Deborah," my father would say, puffing on a cigar that cost more than the shoes I needed. "We wouldn't want you growing up entitled like those other kids in the zip code." The irony was a bitter pill I swallowed daily. Abuelo Tomas would visit on the weekends. He was the only one who saw through it. He'd sit with me in the garden, his hands calloused and stained with wood glue, and tell me stories about the old country. "Don't listen to them, Debrida," he'd mutter, leaning in so my mother wouldn't hear. "The money I'm putting away for you, it's not for gowns and galas. It's for your no fund. So you can say no to anyone who tries to own your soul." When he passed away during my sophomore year of college, I was devastated. But my parents? They were busy planning the most charitable funeral in the history of the county. They turned his death into a fundraiser for hospice care awareness. They didn't even let me speak at his service. Instead, they had a local senator give a eulogy about the Martinez family's commitment to dignity in end-of-life care. I remember standing at the graveside, watching the mahogany casket, the one thing they actually paid for, being lowered into the ground. My father leaned over and whispered, "I've taken over the executorship of the trust, Deborah. It's a lot of paperwork. Don't worry your head about it. We'll handle the taxes and the filings." The time I was grieving. I trusted him. He was my father. He was a saint. Why would a saint steal from his own daughter? Toxicity escalated after I graduated. I had a degree in political science and a mountain of debt because my parents insisted I invest in myself by taking out loans instead of using the trust. It'll make the eventual inheritance mean more, my mother had argued. I moved back home for 6 months to save money, and it was a descent into a private hell. My mother would walk into my room at 2 a.m., flip on the lights, and start critiquing my energy. "You look haggard, Deborah. It's bad for the brand. We're hosting the mayor tomorrow. Try to look like you aren't failing at life." One night, I found a stack of mail on the foyer table. It was an invitation to a private auction for a rare vintage watch collection. My father's name was on it, but the RSVP note, handwritten by my mother, read, "Payment to be processed through the TM Heritage account. Tiempo más Martinez." My grandfather. I felt a chill go down my spine. I took a photo of the note with my phone. When I confronted my father about it the next morning, he didn't even flinch. He just sipped his espresso and looked at me with a terrifyingly blank expression. "That's a management fee, Deborah," he said calmly. "The cost of overseeing such a large portfolio is significant. We are essentially your employees. You should be grateful we don't charge you more. A management fee for a watch?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "That's my tuition money. That's the money for my first house." My mother walked in, her face twisted in a sneer of pure disgust. "How dare you speak to your father that way? Through all the charity we do? After the way we've kept this family's name spotless? You're a selfish, ungrateful brat. You want the money? Go out and earn it just like we did." The lie was so bold, so absolute, that for a moment I actually doubted myself. Maybe I was being entitled. Maybe management fees really were that high. But then I looked at the way they looked at each other, a quick, conspiratorial glance. It was a look of two predators who had just successfully diverted a threat. I moved out that weekend. I didn't tell them where I was going. I took a job at the diner and the paralegal firm, working 80 hours a week, watching my health deteriorate while I watched them on the local news, cutting ribbons on new buildings. Every time I saw their faces on a top 10 philanthropists list, I felt a physical surge of nausea. I started keeping a journal, a detailed log of every interaction, every time they denied me access to my own funds, every charitable event they attended while I was eating ramen in the dark because I couldn't afford the electricity bill. The psychological toll was immense. I started having panic attacks in the break room of the law firm. I'd see a man who looked like my father and my heart would start racing, my vision tunneling until I was gasping for air. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I was the daughter of the saints, yet I was the only person in the city they were actively crucifying. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. Came with a $15 overdraft fee and the sight of my mother's emerald silk gown shimmering under the ballroom lights, bought and paid for by a dead man's love for his granddaughter. Standing in that hallway at the gala, staring at the $314.12 balance on my screen, the good daughter inside me finally died. The girl who wanted their approval, the girl who believed their lies about character building, was gone. In her place was someone cold, someone sharp, and someone who knew exactly how to use the justice they loved to talk about so much against them. I closed my laptop and tucked it under my arm. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just waited. I waited until the applause died down, until my parents stepped off the stage, basking in the glow of 1,000 camera flashes. I walked back into the ballroom, found the bar, and ordered the most expensive glass of champagne on the menu, charging it directly to the Martinez family table. As I took a sip, the bubbles burning my throat, I caught my mother's eye. She looked at me, confused by the sudden, chilling smile on my face. She didn't know it yet, but the Saint era was about to come to a very loud, very public end. The aftermath of the gala wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a cold, calculated descent into a special kind of domestic warfare. My parents, ever the masters of the silent correction, didn't mention my expensive champagne charge until the following Sunday. They had this ritual, the family strategy brunch, where we were expected to show up at their limestone mansion to discuss the upcoming week's social calendar. It was less of a meal and more of a performance review. I sat at the long mahogany table, the smell of expensive roast coffee and smoked salmon normally enough to make my starving stomach growl. But today, looking at them, I felt nothing but a dull, throbbing hatred. My father was flipping through the Sterling Heights Gazette, pointing at the front-page photo of them holding the Pillar of Justice Award. "The lighting was a bit harsh on your chin, Elena," he remarked, not looking up. "But the headline is perfect. The Martinez Legacy, a foundation of selflessness." My mother daintily patted her lips with a linen napkin. "It's a win for the foundation, Ricardo. Although," she shifted her gaze to me, her eyes sharpening like a hawk's, "we did receive the incidental bill from the ballroom bar. A $60 glass of vintage Krug? Really, Deborah? After we were so kind as to include you in our night?" "I was thirsty," I said, my voice flat. "And since you were celebrating with the money Abuelo Tomas left for me, I figured I'd have a sip of my own inheritance." The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. My father folded the newspaper with a slow, deliberate precision. He set it on the table and leaned forward, his hands interlocking. The sunlight caught the gold of his Patek Philippe, another management fee purchase, no doubt. "We have discussed this," he said, his voice dropping to that low, terrifyingly calm register he used to intimidate his junior partners. "That money is being protected. You are 26, living in a hovel, working a dead-end job. You have shown zero financial literacy. If we handed you that capital now, you'd blow it on experiences and cheap distractions. We are curating a legacy for you. One day you will thank us." "I'm 26 and failing because I'm paying back $60,000 in student loans that my trust should have covered," I snapped, my hand gripping the arm of the chair so hard my knuckles turned white. "I'm failing because you refuse to release the funds for a down payment on a condo, forcing me to throw half my paycheck into a slumlord's pocket. You aren't curating a legacy. You're laundering my future into your social status." My mother let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "Social status? Deborah, we are the status. We provide for this city. What do you provide? You bring us nothing but shame and bills. If you want to talk about your money, then perhaps we should talk about the cost of raising you. The private tutors, the vacations, the clothes, we've spent more on you than that trust was ever worth." That was the lie. The grand, overarching Martinez lie. They treated my childhood like a bill they were waiting to collect. Every birthday gift had an invisible price tag. Every hug was a loan with a high interest rate. I looked at the bowl of fresh berries in front of me, blueberries that probably cost more than my entire week's grocery budget, and I felt a sudden, violent urge to flip the table. Instead, I stood up. My chair scraped against the marble floor with a sound like a dying scream. "I want a full accounting," I said, my voice trembling but certain. "I want a line-item ledger of every management fee and every donation made from the TM Heritage account in the last 5 years. By Friday." My father didn't move. He just picked up his coffee. "Or what, Deborah? You'll sue us? With what money? You can't even afford a parking ticket. Don't be melodramatic. It doesn't suit the Martinez brand." I walked out of that house feeling like I was vibrating out of my own skin. The humiliation was physical, a hot, prickly rash spreading across my neck. They weren't just stealing, they were gaslighting me into believing I was the thief for wanting what was mine. The next 3 weeks were a blur of exhaustion and quiet desperation. I was working the morning shift at the diner, smelling like grease and old coffee before sprinting to the law firm to file briefs until 8 p.m. But my real work started at midnight. I moved my desk, a shaky folding table, next to the one window in my studio that caught the street lamp's glow. I had my grandfather's read-only portal open on one side of the screen and a spreadsheet I'd built on the other. I began the grueling process of high-definition forensic accounting. I started noticing patterns. It wasn't just the big donations. My parents were using the trust as a personal slush fund for lifestyle maintenance that they then disguised as charitable expenses. Entry 409, $12,500. Logistics for Youth Gala. I cross-referenced this with my mother's private Instagram. On the same date, she had posted a photo of a new, custom-built walk-in humidor for my father's cigar collection. Entry 612, $45,000. Community outreach travel. This matched a 2-week spiritual retreat they took to the Amalfi Coast, where they posted photos of themselves meditating on a private yacht. Every time I found a match, my stomach did a sickening flip. It was systematic. They were draining the lifeblood out of Abuelo's hard work to fuel their delusions of grandeur. I sat there in the dark, the only sound the hum of my laptop's cooling fan and the occasional siren outside, feeling the weight of their betrayal settling into my bones. But the real HD horror came when I found the documents for the Martinez family scholarship. It was their crowning achievement, a scholarship that allegedly paid the full tuition for 5 underprivileged students every year. Press loved it. My parents were featured in a documentary short about investing in the next generation. I dug deeper into the scholarship's back-end filings. The students existed, but the tuition being paid was a fraction of what was being withdrawn from my trust. My parents had set up a shell corporation that vetted the students, taking a 70% administrative fee from the trust before passing the crumbs to the kids. They weren't just stealing from me, they were using me to steal from the very kids they claimed to be saving. I remember staring at the screen at 3 a.m., my eyes burning and red-rimmed. I looked at the name of one of the students, Marcus Thorne. He was a brilliant kid from the South Side trying to go to med school. The trust had withdrawn $50,000 for his scholarship, but when I searched the university's public donor roll, they had only received $5,000 in his name. Where was the other $45,000? I followed the digital breadcrumbs. It had been moved to an account titled M Properties LLC. I checked the business registry. The owner? Elena Martinez. The address? A luxury condo in downtown Chicago that I'd never heard of. They were buying real estate with my inheritance while I slept on a mattress I'd found on the sidewalk when I first moved in. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. This wasn't just about management or protecting me. This was criminal. This was a long con run by the 2 people who were supposed to love me most in the world. I thought about Abuelo Tomas. I thought about the way he used to smell like cedar wood and peppermint. He had died thinking he had secured my life. He had died thinking I would be free. Instead, he had accidentally funded the very cage my parents had built for me. The physical reaction was violent. I ran to the tiny, stained bathroom and retched into the toilet. I stayed there on the cold linoleum floor for an hour, sobbing silently so the neighbors wouldn't hear. I felt small. I felt erased. Every Saint of Sterling Heights award was a tombstone for my future. But then the grief started to turn. Tears dried, leaving my face feeling tight and salty. I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror. My eyes weren't the eyes of a struggling daughter anymore. They were the eyes of a paralegal. A Martinez. I knew how they thought. I knew how they protected themselves. And I knew their biggest weakness. They cared more about their reputation than their lives. I stood up, wiped my face with a damp rag, and walked back to the computer. I didn't go to bed. I started a new folder on my desktop. I labeled it, The Canonization. If they wanted to be saints, I was going to give them the martyrdom they deserved. I began drafting the first of 25 formal inquiries to the IRS and the state attorney's office. I didn't just want my money back. I wanted to watch the brass plaques be scraped off the walls. I wanted to see the look on my mother's face when the Citizen of the Year became the Inmate of the Month. I worked until the sun began to peek through the smog of the Chicago skyline. By 7 a.m., I had a digital dossier that could sink a small navy. I wasn't just a prop anymore. I was the lead prosecutor in the trial of Elena and Ricardo Martinez. And I was going to be the one to hand down the sentence. The breaking point didn't come from a grand confrontation. It came from a cheap piece of plastic. It was a Tuesday evening, raining, that miserable gray Chicago drizzle that turns the city into a cold sponge. I was at the pharmacy, trying to pick up a prescription for a lung infection I'd been fighting for 3 weeks. The pharmacist, a tired-looking woman with smeared eyeliner, looked at me with a mix of pity and annoyance. "That'll be $84, Deborah," she said. I swiped my card. Declined. I felt that familiar hot rush of shame crawl up my neck. I tried again. Declined. I checked my app. My phone service provider had auto-drafted my bill 3 days early, leaving me with exactly $9. "Is there a problem?" a voice boomed behind me. I spun around. There, standing in the aisle with a basket full of expensive organic vitamins and artisanal soaps, was my mother's best friend, Cheryl. Cheryl was the kind of woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and spent her afternoons gossiping about charity strategy. "Oh, Deborah." "It's you," Cheryl chirped, her eyes scanning my grease-stained diner uniform and my pale, sickly face. "I saw your mother yesterday at the Botanical Garden fundraiser. She mentioned you were struggling. She told us all how hard it is for her to watch you refuse their help because of your pride. She's so worried, dear. She even asked the prayer circle to keep you in their thoughts." I felt the air leave my lungs. My mother wasn't just stealing my money, she was using my poverty, a poverty she created, as a tool to garner more sympathy, to play the role of the long-suffering mother of a wayward daughter. "She said that," I whispered, my voice sounding like broken glass. "Oh, yes," Cheryl sighed, reaching out to pat my arm with a gloved hand. "She said you've always had a difficult spirit. But don't worry, the Martinez name still stands for something. We all admire Elena for how she handles the burden of your choices." I didn't answer. I walked out of that pharmacy into the rain, leaving the medicine on the counter. I walked 6 blocks in the freezing downpour, my lungs burning with every breath, my shoes squelching in the puddles. The burden. The difficult spirit. The pride. I reached my studio apartment, and the first thing I saw was a 24-hour eviction notice taped to the door. My landlord, a man who didn't care about Citizen of the Year awards, had finally run out of patience. I sat on the floor of the hallway, the wet fabric of my uniform sticking to my skin, and I started to laugh. It was a jagged, hysterical sound that echoed in the empty stairwell. They were going to let me become homeless. They were going to let me sleep in a shelter, probably one they donated $10,000 to for the tax break, just so they could tell their friends at the next gala about their tragic, rebellious daughter. They were willing to sacrifice my physical safety for a better story. That was the moment. The good daughter didn't just die, she was cremated. The heat of my rage was so intense it felt like it was drying my clothes from the inside out. I stood up, ripped the notice off the door, and walked inside. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat down at my laptop, the blue light reflecting in my eyes like cold fire. "You want a difficult spirit, Mom?" I muttered to the empty room. "I'll show you exactly how difficult I can be." I spent the next 48 hours in a caffeinated fever dream. I didn't go to work. I didn't sleep. My legal training as a paralegal finally became the weapon it was meant to be. I knew that simply accusing them of theft wouldn't be enough. They had the best lawyers in the state on speed dial. I needed something they couldn't bury. I needed the smoking gun that bypassed their conservator status. I dug back into the M Properties LLC filings I'd found earlier. I spent 16 hours navigating the labyrinth of the Cook County Clerk's digital archives, pulling deeds and property tax records. And then I found it. My father, in his arrogance, had made a fatal clerical error. To hide the purchase of the downtown luxury condo, he had listed the TM Heritage account as the primary guarantor on the mortgage. But Abuelo Tomas's trust had a very specific ironclad anti-alienation clause. It explicitly stated that the principal of the trust could never be used as collateral for personal real estate ventures not owned directly by the beneficiary, me. By using my trust to guarantee their secret condo, they hadn't just mismanaged funds. They had committed mortgage fraud and tax evasion on a federal level. but I needed the physical proof. I knew where my father kept his private ledger, the one he didn't show the auditors. It was in the floor safe in his study at the Sterling Heights mansion. I knew the code. It was my birthday. He used it not because he loved me, but because it was the one date he could never forget to include in his charity anecdotes. I waited until Thursday night. I knew they were at a symphony for the soul benefit. I still had my emergency key to the back mudroom. Entering that house felt like walking into a tomb. It was silent, smelling of expensive furniture polish and filtered air. I crept into the study, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knelt on the Persian rug, peeled back the corner and punched in the numbers, June 12, 98. The heavy steel door clicked open with a sickeningly smooth sound. Inside wasn't just a ledger. There were folders. Folders labeled bribes/grants, media contributions, and the prize, a folder labeled TM liquidation strategy. I pulled out my phone and began scanning. My hands were steady now. I was a machine. I scanned the wire transfer receipts that showed money moving directly from my trust to a private offshore account in the Caymans. I scanned the emails between my mother and a local journalist, where she offered a generous donation to the journalist's favorite charity in exchange for killing a story about my father's previous failed business ventures. And then I found the ultimate leverage. It was a letter from a physician dated 3 years ago. It was a formal assessment of my grandfather's mental state during the final month of his life. My parents had suppressed it. The letter stated that Abuelo Tomas was of perfectly sound mind and exceptional clarity when he signed the final trust amendments, the ones my father had tried to claim were confused and invalid to justify his conservatorship. They had lied to the court to get control. They had committed perjury. I heard the heavy rumble of the garage door opening. They were home. I threw the folders back into the safe, spun the dial, and tucked the rug back. I didn't leave through the back. I walked right into the grand foyer, standing under the $20,000 chandelier, clutching my phone like a holy relic. My parents walked in, laughing, draped in cashmere and smelling of expensive wine. They stopped dead when they saw me. Deborah! My mother's face twisted into an immediate mask of annoyance. What are you doing here? You look like a street person. You're dripping water on the marble. The difficult spirit has arrived, I said, my voice echoing in the vast, empty space. My father stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. You've crossed a line, Deborah. Leave now, or I'll have the security service remove you. We've had enough of your outbursts. I'm not having an outburst, Dad, I said, holding up my phone. I'm having a discovery phase. I know about the M Properties condo. I know about the Caymans. I know about the suppressed medical report from Dr. Eris. And I have the wire transfer receipts from the safe. The blood drained from my father's face so fast he actually stumbled back a step. My mother's hand went to her throat, her fingers fumbling with her pearls. You broke into the safe, she hissed. That's theft. We'll call the police. Please do, I said, stepping closer until I could see the sweat beading on my father's forehead. Call them. Let's have the police, the IRS, and the Sterling Heights Gazette all here at once. I'd love to explain how the citizens of the year are actually common thieves who've been laundering a dead man's money to buy their way into the social register. What do you want? My father rasped. The saint was gone. In his place was a terrified, aging man who knew his gilded world was one phone call away from collapsing. I want everything, I said, the coldness in my soul finally matching the coldness of the room. But we're not doing this tonight. Tonight, I'm going to go sleep in my moldy studio apartment. And tomorrow morning, you're going to receive a list of demands from my chosen legal counsel. If a single penny is missing, or if you try to move a single asset, I hit send on an email to every major news outlet in Chicago. I walked past them, my shoulder brushing my mother's emerald silk. As I reached the door, I paused. Oh, and Mom? Don't worry about the prayer circle. I think your prayers are about to be answered. You're finally going to get the public's full attention. The air in my father's high-rise law office was pressurized, the kind of silence that precedes a controlled demolition. I sat across from them, wearing a sharp borrowed suit from a friend who worked in corporate litigation. My parents sat side by side, their faces pale and drawn, looking like wax figures melting under a spotlight. They had brought their fixer, a shark-eyed attorney named Silas, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else than defending a sinking ship. "Let's be clear," I said, sliding a thick manila folder across the glass table. The sound of the paper hitting the surface was like a gunshot. "This isn't a negotiation. This is a settlement of accounts. I have the forensic audit. I have the mortgage fraud evidence. I have the suppressed medical reports." "Deborah Mija," my father started, his voice a pathetic, gravelly whisper. "We can settle this as a family. We don't need to destroy everything we've built for the community." "You didn't build it, Ricardo," I cut him off, the use of his first name making him flinch as if I'd slapped him. "Abuelo Tomas built it. I funded it. And the community? They're about to find out that their saints are just white-collar parasites." Silas cleared his throat. "What are your terms, Ms. Martinez?" I leaned back, feeling a cold, crystalline clarity I'd never known. "First, full restitution of the trust's original principal plus 10% annual interest, compounded from the day of Abuelo's death. That's $6.8 million. Second, you will liquidate the M Properties condo and donate the proceeds, every cent, to the students you defrauded through your scholarship shell. Third, you will both resign from every board, every committee, and every foundation in this city." Immediately, my mother let out a strangled sob. "You're stripping us of our lives. We'll be pariahs. Do you know what this will do to our reputation?" "Your reputation is a lie bought with my blood," I said, leaning in until I could see the tiny, frantic pulses in her neck. "And here's the kicker. You're going to issue a joint public statement. You won't admit to the theft yet, but you will state that personal financial mismanagement has forced you to step down and that you are refocusing on family. If you don't, the federal whistleblower tip I've already drafted goes out at 5 p.m. today. I've already CC'd the Herald's investigative desk on the evidence summary." My father looked at the clock. It was 3:42 p.m. He looked at the folder, then at my mother. The silence stretched for a minute, heavy with the stench of their rotting legacy. Finally, he picked up the pen. His hand, usually so steady when signing multimillion-dollar contracts, shook so violently he had to grip the table with his other hand. As he signed the transfer of assets, I felt the invisible chains that had bound me to their brand snap. I watched my mother sign, her tears smudging the ink on the very documents that stripped her of her emerald gown lifestyle. I didn't feel pity. I felt the weight of every skipped meal, every past due notice, and every cold night in that studio apartment leaving my body. I took the signed documents, stood up, and looked at them one last time. "The house in Sterling Heights is next. I'm giving you 30 days to pack. Since you love charity so much, I've decided the house would make an excellent permanent residence for the foster youth program you've been using as a tax shield." I walked out of that office and into the Chicago afternoon. The sun was finally out, reflecting off the glass towers. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in my life, the air didn't feel stolen. Felt mine. 6 months later, I'm sitting on the porch of a small, sun-drenched bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. It's not a mansion. It's not a museum. It's a home. The smell of cedar and peppermint, the scents of my grandfather, waft through the open windows. My parents are gone from the social registers. They live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a town where nobody knows their names. They spend their days dodging calls from former friends and dealing with the IRS audits I triggered. The Saints of Sterling Heights are a cautionary tale now, a footnote in a city that has already moved on to the next shiny donor. But this isn't about them anymore. I've spent the last few months doing what my grandfather actually wanted. I didn't just hoard the money. I've established the Tomas Martinez Legacy Fund. It's not run by a board of socialites. It's run by a group of former foster kids and community organizers. We don't have galas. We don't have golden gavels. We have results. Last week, I saw Marcus Thorne, the student my parents tried to rob. He's in his second year of med school now, his tuition fully covered by a trust that actually belongs to the people it claims to help. He shook my hand, and for the first time I felt the Martinez legacy actually means something. I've learned that family isn't a matter of blood or optics. It's a matter of integrity. My chosen family consists of the people who saw me when I was a street person in their eyes, the neighbors who shared their soup, the co-workers who covered my shifts when I was too sick to stand, and the ghost of an old carpenter who loved me enough to give me a no fund. I still work as a paralegal, but now I work for a non-profit that fights for victims of financial elder abuse and trust fraud. I'm good at it. I know all the tricks because I was raised by the masters. Sometimes, late at night, I look at the Citizen of the Year trophy I took from my father's study before the house was cleared. I keep it in my garage, tucked behind some old paint cans. It's a reminder that a saint is just a sinner with a better PR team, and that the only plaque worth having is the one you don't have to steal from your own blood to earn. Elena Martinez. I am 27 years old. I am no longer a prop, an accessory, or a burden. I am the executor of my own life. And for the first time, the balance is exactly where it needs to be.